Let's go to London now and bring in Negla Abdalla. She's a Sudanese activist and writer. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Abdalla. Protesters came out despite the obvious threats to their safety in Sudan. What do you think the turnout says about the determination of the protesters at this point?
I think the turnout just proves how resilient the Sudanese community actually is. I mean, if we look back at what happened on June the 3rd, despite the massacre, despite the brutality of the nature of the violence, despite the rape and all the things that many had witnessed and many that had lost, they're still in the streets. I mean, on Matar Street alone, we reportedly have about 970,000 people that were marching. So I think those numbers just really speak to how these protesters are adamant that they will not stop until we gain a civilian rule.
What do you make of the authorities' assertion that it was vandals responsible for the gunfire which killed this young man in the northeastern town? Is that sort of a narrative we're likely to hear more of, do you think?
100%. I think ever since Bashir's regime and the TMC, we're very used to the narrative they bring up, the lies and the excuses. When the massacre had happened, you know, they jumped straight away and were like, okay, this was actually done because there was an influx of drugs and there was an influx of criminals in the sit-in, which turned out to be false. And then they turned around to blame the West. And prior to what's happening today in the protest, they already mentioned 2 days ago that any blood loss or anyone who died in these protesters, the blood will be on the hand of the FFC and they are the ones who should be held responsible. So this is a narrative that we're very used to, that we've heard for the last 30 years. And I'm very sure that they will not stop trying to feed this narrative into people.
What will it take, do you think, for the ruling military to step aside?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the people on the ground and the diaspora need to remain very resilient. But I think that we need to do a lot more lobbying and we need to get the backing of the UK, the EU, the UN to support us in this. And most importantly, we need the other governments like, for example, Saudi Arabia and the Egypt and the UAE in general, who are looking after their own interests and their support for the military council benefits them. We need them to step back and basically let us handle our own affairs.
Is there any sort of compromise that you think the protesters should be considering?
To be honest, no. I think we're way past the point of compromise. What happened on June the 3rd was just awful, barbaric. I just think if we're talking about, you can't even describe them as humans. We're talking about animals and savages who brutally murdered well over 500, 600 people, who have injured over 750 and raped many women. And this is all in the space of 1 day we're talking about. So only, you know, we don't know what's happened, how many have died prior, how many have died after. Like, the numbers will be huge. So I think we're way past the point of compromising. I think the only solution is a civilian one, and that's it.
Thank you so much for that. That is Negla Abdalla, a Sudanese activist and writer, live from London.